Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Golden parachutes for Australian CEOs have shrunk to their lowest levels in 15 years with a sharp drop in termination payments for ASX100 CEOs for fiscal year 24 compared to the previous year. CEO pay at Australia's biggest companies have also flattened over the last decade. The median realised pay is now $4.15 million. But having said that, CEO pay at smaller companies is rising. Ed John is Executive Manager, Governance and Engagement at ACSI, the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors. ACSI is a group of super funds as well as international asset owners and institutional investors who collectively have almost $2 trillion in funds under management. They focus on governance and sustainability issues in listed companies, and given they own a stake in so many of them, tend to be quite influential. Every year, ACSI releases its study of CEO pay in ASX100 companies. John, after that very long introduction, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Nice to be back, Sean.
So the media is making a lot of the idea with termination payments being lower and stuff like that, which is fair enough. What I took from the survey, which I thought was encouraging or not, depending on your viewpoint, I suppose, is that the median pay is now, I think it was 55 times the average wage, whereas 10 years ago it was 77 times the average wage, which suggests to me, whilst the numbers are very big, the actual difference between the average wage rate and the median pay is smaller.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Sean. So over that 10 years, you have seen that restraint or that flattening of outcomes. So 71 times 10 years ago, 55 times today. So to me, it just points to the fact we're doing something right in Australia, because you look at countries like the UK or the US, there's been a real CEO pay breakout over that same period. And recent research actually out of the US shows multiples of something like 360 times a median salary in large companies.
Wow.
So there has been that breakout. I think we've avoided that here for a few reasons, but particularly I think greater investor scrutiny as well as a bit more diligence from Aussie boards.
Is that why CEO termination payments have been reduced as well?
Well, that has been a factor. With termination pay, following the global financial crisis, there was actually a change in the law in 2009. So just after the GFC, you saw $80 million paid out in golden parachutes to top 100 executives, which was a disaster for shareholders who'd already been impacted. And it sent a really bad message because many of those leaving, the companies were in flames at the time. The law changed, which effectively gave shareholders a greater voice or an ability to vote no on large golden parachutes and termination payments. And since that time, investors, so super funds, as well as, mum and dad investors and others listening to this show have actually, voted no on those outsized termination payments. And boards have really listened and I think held executives more accountable. So that work over time has had a huge impact, and the numbers are down substantially.
Does ACSI have a view on whether the pay is okay or not, generally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we do this study to track the market trends. I think the okay is in a way in the eye of the beholder, but one thing we often come back to is value for money. We can all think of CEOs and companies that have shot the lights out, and there may be large pay packets there, but the experience of investors has been very good over a long period. But we can also think of some of those companies, and I'm not going to name them or embarrass anyone today, but we can think of those outcomes where it feels like people are getting a bonus just to turn up to work, or getting bonuses where, the performance just simply isn't there. I think that's the piece that really concerns the investors. And that's, where we see, large votes against remuneration reports or a lot of media scrutiny and those sorts of outcomes.
Ed, I am going to push you after the break on it, but just before we go to the break, you're talking about realised pay here, and it's really important that we define what that is.
Yes. Yeah. Great point, Sean. So we talk about realised pay. Disclosures from companies on executive pay are very complex. So we do this extra work in the study every year to show realised pay, which is effectively cash pay plus the value of any share-based bonuses that a CEO has received in any one year. So it's much more like the kind of take-home pay, if you like, in that particular year for those executives.
Okay. Staying with me, Ed. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Ed John from the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors. Ahead of the break, you defined what realised pay was, and it's kind of, think of it as take-home pay. You also, not that you were mentioning names, there are some, in fact, one of the top 10 CEO payouts is actually from a company who is one of the one or two worst performing stocks in the market. The flip side, rightly or wrongly, I think Matt Common from Commonwealth Bank, biggest company in the market, up 40 or 50% over the past 12 months. His pay, I think he comes in at 18 or high teens or something like that. Do the best performing biggest companies have CEOs who earn most or not?
It's a good question. That changes from year to year. We often see a group of smaller companies may make the list in a single year. And often that's on the back of a small company, they might triple or, double or triple in size over a performance period. So their share price might go up, 400%. So that puts some of those companies into the list. But the big names, so, the banks, the large miners, Macquarie and others are often on that list. So it is a good representation or a long-term representation of the large companies, but you can get some smaller names in there, particularly where share prices are on the tear.
What about foreign CEOs? Well, they're actually Australian companies, but their CEOs are paid in US dollars generally. Robert Thompson at News Corp is a good example. Mick Farrell at ResMed. Newmont Mining is a Canadian group listed here. James Hardie Industries is the other big one. Do they get paid more generally?
Short answer is yes. I think there is a cultural factor, or there are specific market factors on CEO pay. And as we talked about earlier, I think Australian investors and Australian boards have paid closer attention to CEO pay. In places like the US, there has been that breakout. So we do see a number of US names on the list. I think the concern can be that in places like the US, they don't necessarily have performance hurdles for some of the pay that happens there, which is a major concern when you see payments north of 50, 60, even in the US market, over 100 million in any 1 year. The question over performance and what is delivered is a big one for investors.
What about bonus payments? So I think there were only 6 of the top 200, 6 of the 150 that you looked at that didn't get a bonus. If that's the case, it suggests that it's kind of just normal part of your package. You get the bonus.
Well, that's right, Sean. I think that challenge of, we don't want to see an everyone wins the prize culture when it comes to bonuses. So that average around about 60% of bonuses are paid out across the market. Dropped during the pandemic, but has edged up. So that is a concern. I think it's a focus for investors, but really the question then comes down to the individual company. For that specific person or that specific group of executives, again, did performance actually match what was paid? So a major focus and a concern in some of those companies where it feels like the bonuses just become a given or an expectation.
What about smaller company pay? They seem to be, the CEOs of smaller companies are doing, their growth is higher relative to the large companies.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. And it's an area we want to do further work because there are a couple of names that have sort of shot up the list this year. But whether that's a case of just growth in that part of the market over the past decade, interesting to see. Is that because those companies are getting bigger? Is it because there's been growth in some of those share prices, or is it a case of keeping up with the Joneses? I think we're going to have to do some further work, and it would be a concern if there is an ongoing uplift or breakout in that part of the market.
Ed, you might not actually want to comment on specifics, but Levisa's Victor Herrero came in at number 2. He was only behind Robert Thompson from News Corp, which is a US-based executive. Is that a specific, without saying that's good or bad, right? Is that a stock-specific issue there, or is it just the fact that the guy earns a lot of money?
Well, I think really each outcome is a stock-specific issue. So, we include numbers in the research around performance and particularly sort of TSR performance over 5 years. So I think that plays a role. But really then to go further, you need to break down what were the annual or the longer term incentives that have been paid out to get you there. So really a company-specific issue.
Ever the diplomat, Ed, ever the diplomat. Well done. Just finally, how much do super funds take this research and provide it and make commentary on it to the big companies? Because I think this is the best research in terms of CEO pay. And I'm sure it's something that all large investors and small investors, for that matter, care about.
No, it's certainly something that we've found is valuable just to see what those trends are. And also, we know boards pay a lot of attention to it as well. So again, I think that diligent work of investors, large and small, of Australian boards to actually track these things and make sure pay actually reflects performance is a key takeaway. And some of the results this year show that all of that work, the votes against poor practices, the engagement that Australian boards do with investors, the scrutiny from media and others has actually paid off over time. And seeing termination payments drop, seeing the sort of average hold flat. Sure, people can make good money, but that expectation that it's actually linked to delivering for investors is something that we're getting right to a certain extent in the Australian market, but we need to be really careful that we keep that culture.
Ed, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
That was Ed John, Executive Manager, Governance and Engagement at ACSI, the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed Business News You Can Use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.